Hello, we're live and welcome to the Bradcast. I'm Bradley J, and it is Christmas time. I can tell because I see a lot of Christmas movies, and it's sneaking right up on us, right? It's like 13 days away or something like that. So it's time to celebrate Christmas, broadcast-wise. And thanks to Richard Pickering of the Plymouth Patuxet Museums, he's supplied, it's not a very personable way to say it, but he has introduced me to Malka Benjamin, who has 30 years of experience working there. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about Christmas in the English villages, what it was like, and Christmas in the Queen's Court, and what it was like. And then we're going to talk about the grim Christmas here in New England, 1621. Turns out it was kind of a contentious day. And it's a super interesting story, and Malka is the expert at that story. So first, Malka, tell me about your time at the museum. You've been there forever. You've known Richard Pickering forever. And it just seems like a heavenly place for persons interested in history, especially the history of the area.
Yes, so wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me, Bradley J. I have been at Plymouth Patuxet Museums on and off for 30 years. However, unlike Richard, who started as an adult, I started when I was 8 years old. So I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. I actually lived in Brookline for the first 3 years of my life. And when I was 6 years old, my mom brought me down to Plymouth Patuxet Museums, which was then called Plymouth Plantation, for just a fun mother-daughter day. And during that visit, a pilgrim lady asked me to help dry her dishes. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I wanted to go back. I kept asking if we could go back. My parents ended up getting a membership. We would come down about once a month to the museum. And fast forward about a year and a half after a visit, I ended up writing a fan letter to a pilgrim addressed to Mistress Fuller at Plymouth Plantation, P.O. Box 1620, and she got it and wrote back and told me that they had a child volunteer program, which she encouraged me to apply for, which I did, and I was accepted. So my first character was a young girl named Sarah Jenny, who came over 3 years after the Mayflower, and Richard Pickering was my pilgrim father that summer. So we go way back, and it is an absolute joy and pleasure for me now as an adult to get to work with him as a colleague and also to have him as a mentor, which I very much consider him to be.
So you went on to be a highly educated historian. Tell me about some of the highlights of your career.
I mean, so I actually, several years ago, I asked my parents over dinner one night, which came first, my interest and love of history or being involved at Plymouth Patuxet Museums. And each one answered one and one answered the other. So I can't tell you, it's all kind of muddled up, but I love the past. I love learning about the past, but more so I love helping other people connect to the past so that we can learn from it. I have had a wonderful time. I spent many years working with the National Park Service. Much of that time was spent at the John F. Kennedy National Historic Site in Brookline, Massachusetts. So dipped my toe into the 20th century. And that was very interesting, being in an urban setting and dealing with such a well-known family, and very interesting at that site, really not just looking at the family, but also commemoration and the creation of national memory.
So you spent time over on Beale Street? Is at that?
Yes, I did. I spent many years on Beale Street. I developed a walking tour of the Kennedy's Brookline. So, maybe 15 years ago, you would see Ranger Malka leading a group of folks down Beale Street over, the devotion school and kind of exploring the neighborhood.
That's excellent. Now, let's get into Christmas. There probably was a big difference between Christmas in the villages and Christmas at court. How do those, paupers, those poor folks in the villages celebrate Christmas?
Well, I think, when we think about Christmas in Elizabethan and Tudor England, in some ways it's very similar to Christmas today, and in other ways it's a little different. But no matter who you are, whether you're a pauper or someone at court, Christmas is probably your favorite time of the year, especially if you're a working person. Christmas is the time that you are sanctioned to be able to kick back, relax, play games, sports, gamble, singing, dancing, feasting, beautiful church services. And when we talk about Christmas in 16th and 17th century England, what we're talking about is not one day, but more of a season. So you might be familiar with the song, The 12 Days of Christmas. Christmas actually was 12 days. So it went from Christmas Day, the 25th of December, to Epiphany, 12th night. So you might know the Shakespeare play, which is the 6th of January. And throughout that period, there are days with church services, feasting, and it's just the celebration goes on for days and days and days. And so as we get into talking about why Puritans are not into Christmas, it's very interesting to me since it's really the national holiday in many ways. So what you would see...
So it's important to note, you painted a picture of sort of a sinful bacchanalia where people were doing they were gambling. And
they were gambling. They were playing dice.
They were doing all the stuff you're not supposed to do. All the sinning. They were sinning.
You don't gamble on Christmas today?
I don't gamble. I know I'm not going to win, so no, I don't. I don't even play scratch tickets, so I know I'm not going to win. But people do. But they were. It's important to point out they was doing lots of stuff considered sin.
But they didn't think of it that way. To them, it was a way to kick back and have fun and relax.
Okay.
And this was the one time of year they could do it. And in some ways, it's safer to kick back and relax in the winter because the roads are not good for traveling.
Right.
And so you don't have to worry as much about, thieves on the roads. Your agricultural duties are done for the year. This is the break before you restart the agricultural work, traditionally Plow Monday, which follows 12th night, where they sort of ritually bless the plows and start working towards the next agricultural cycle.
But there were groups of people quietly seething and not liking what was going on.
Yes, especially as you get into Queen Elizabeth's reign and beyond into the early 17th century.
Okay, what was it like there at the court with the Queen and all?
Yeah. So, depending on which court you're looking at, it's going to be slightly different in terms of what you're seeing. But again, 12 days of celebrations, you would see feasting you would generally see pies. So think huge pies filled with all different kinds of meat, possibly multiple different kinds of bird meat and meat in one pie. I haven't seen blackbirds, but believe it or not, turkey was actually by the late 1500s considered a very common and sort of celebratory Christmas dish, which I think to us Americans seems a little funny, but turkeys had been brought back from the Americas to Europe in the 1530s. And by the 1570s, they had become a really popular and customary Christmas dish. So that could be baked into a pie, but pigeons, quail, duck, goose, swan. So remember, if you're high status, you're eating swan, you're eating venison. But these Christmas pies, a lot of them also have fruit in them. So they're a flavor profile that we're not used to today. So a traditional mincemeat pie, which you'll see at Christmas, which today is often made just with fruit, historically had meat. So you would take pounds of beef, pork, chop that up, also sew it. So they would use the fat, chop that up, and then pounds of raisins, which remember are imported. And those raisins also have to be cleaned. So when you go and open your little box of raisins for a snack, you have it easy. 400 years ago, you would have to pick the stem off each raisin. You would have to cut it open and take the seeds out. You soak it in warm water because they're super dry to sort of plump them up. And then you can put them in your pie to bake. You might use prunes, if you're really wealthy, maybe some dates, and then also spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, mace. And remember, these are all really expensive because they're all imported. And so you have all these flavors mixing in your pie. And the other thing, when you think about a 17th century pie that is a little different from a modern pie, is that the crust is really meant to hold the pie. It's not necessarily meant to be eaten, especially by the wealthy people. So the crusts, most of these pies are not made in a pie dish like we make pies today, but the crust is so stiff that it can stand up by itself. So there's recipes in the period for using rye flour and hot water, or cold water and wheat flour, and they make this really stiff pastry dough that can hold the shape, whether it's round or rectangular in the shape of the mince pie to evoke the manger where Jesus was born. Or, you see pies that are shaped as fish, that have fish inside in the period, or that are multi-tiered, and they're very elaborate. And so what would happen is the pie gets cut open and you eat what's on the inside. And then if you're a servant in the royal household, you would be eating the leftovers, right? So you would get to eat the crust. And sort of whatever is left stuck to it. So you would see lots of feasting in the court. You would see masks. So people dressing in elaborate costumes and having dances or balls, because dancing is a big part of Christmas celebrations. You would see music, lots and lots of music performances. And we see this at many, we can see the accounts for musicians throughout many of the kings in this period and queens during the Christmas season. You would see Christmas songs, which we call carols today, and sort of Christmas carols in the period being sung, being performed. There are Christmas songs from the period that still survive today. Many people know them, like the Boar's Head Carol, for example, or the Gloucestershire Wassail, or the Holly and the Ivy. And it was just a really celebratory time. There was, of course, a chapel at the court. For example, at Hampton Court Palace, there's a beautiful chapel that's part of the palace. So there'd be services happening as well. But it's really a merry time. What you're not going to see on Christmas Day in the court is gift giving. So gift giving did happen as part of the Christmas season, but it happened on New Year's Day, the 1st of January.
Oh, wow.
And you'll see gift giving, and we can get into that a little bit if you're interested, because it's a little bit different than today. Gift giving is especially prevalent between people on different levels of the social spectrum. So when you look at society in the 17th century and the 16th century, that part of understanding your place in society and thinking about a person is their dependence relationships. So everyone in society has people that they are dependent on for literally their survival, and people who depend on them. And so in the countryside, you'll certainly see gifts between equals, but you'll see a gift from a landlord to a tenant. So that is often a fat capon. What is a capon? A gelded rooster. So think of it basically as a fat chicken. But then the tenants would also be getting gifts from the landlord, because they're going to be entertained and feasted with really good food during the 12 days of Christmas. So for example, with Queen Elizabeth, we see people at court giving her gifts, whether that is money or a beautiful pair of sleeves. We see that pretty frequently. Sleeves in the period could be separate from the garment and then attached. So it's a way to take one base kind of garment and make it look different on different days and create different styles. Jewels were often given to her, but then she would also be gifting back to those people, often gifts of a similar value. So whether it's silver dishes or money, whatever that is. So gift exchange was very important, and it's a way to cement relationships. So if you are on the outs with the queen, you might not get a very nice gift. There is one record of someone who got a pot, like a couple of cooking pots as their gift from her one year because they were not in her good graces.
Wow. I have a question. Who is actually at court? Who makes up the court? Is it a group of people who are functionaries that are necessary, like accountants and their family, or is it just a bunch of people to hang around with the queen so they're not lonesome and keep things interesting and have a lot of court intrigue, or some combination of the two?
So it's a mishmash, and it's going to shift a little bit. So first of all, if we're taking Queen Elizabeth, so you have the queen, and she has her ladies in waiting. So these are the women who she essentially hangs out with, who take care of her. So they'll do things like helping her get dressed and undressed, keeping track of, her clothing, her day to day, but also they become, many of them, her very close friends. They are extremely influential because they have the queen's ear. So everyone wants to be friends with them. And also it makes them very eligible to get married. However, in the case of Queen Elizabeth, she is not, she doesn't really like her ladies in waiting to get married, and she definitely does not like them to get married without her blessing and permission. So creates some sticky situations. So you have the ladies in waiting, and often their families end up getting elevated because of their position at court. Now remember, they are servants. Technically, a lady in waiting is a servant to the queen. They just happen to be from a noble family, because servitude, very, very common in this period in England, but you're always working for someone who's of a higher social station than yourself, because it's a way to increase your social standing by association, which is exactly what happens for the ladies in waiting. We also have the Privy Council. So the Privy Council is made up essentially of advisors who are from high-ranking noble families, and they are the ones who are really helping to run England. And then you have courtiers. You have, the nobility essentially, who will spend time at court. You also have
Who's the nobility? Who are these people?
So your lords, your dukes, your earls, people with land, lots of land and titles.
So the Earl of something or other will swing by court and hang out for a while.
Yes, because they'll have houses in London in addition to houses on their estates in the country. And then you'll also have court musicians. There's theater troupes that are coming in, plus all the, the secretaries and the servants and the cooks and everyone who keeps it running. So it's a very complex place. And when the court moves, when the queen goes on progress, for example, she might be taking a couple hundred people with her.
Right.
So,
man. Okay. So we get the idea. By the way, I just something I learned. How do you say furniture in French? Immobiliare, immobile. It's something about mobile in there, and the reason is because when they would go out, the French court would go out to their summer residence. They would mobilize all their furniture. So I guess it's furniture that's light enough to move around. I made that connection some time back. It's not related, just kind of interesting.
No, but you do see that also in English culture, talking about your movable goods, which includes your furniture.
Okay, now we have, I don't know how much of the lead up to the Mayflower you want to get into for our story, or we can just be at 1621. We've had Thanksgiving. It was great. It was a great diplomatic event, not the sad thing that detractors say it is. It was the sad stuff came later. This was a real wonderful diplomatic event, and you have a couple of months go by, and then you have Christmas, right? Do I have the situation? It's
yes.
Like actually 1 month go by and you have Christmas. And it turns out that not everyone aboard the Mayflower was on board with Christmas. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. And so I think before we get into the Christmas that happens a year after Mayflower, I want to take a little step back and just talk about who's coming on the Mayflower and why they're coming.
Okay.
Because because it's going to be very important then as we look at the Christmas that happens. One of the misconceptions that a lot of folks have about the Pilgrims, when you look at the Mayflower passengers, is that all 102 of them are coming for essentially religious reasons, the freedom to pray according to their conscience. In actuality, we think that there's a bit of a divide, that there are some people who are really just coming for the economic opportunity of being able to own land. And I should say, everyone is coming for the economic opportunity to become a landowner. And then about half of them, maybe a little bit more than half, are also coming for religious reasons. Many of those people were part of a congregation living in exile in Holland, in the city of Leiden, for about a dozen years before coming on Mayflower. But we also see people of similar faith attitudes who are coming straight from England. So I just want to take a moment to define sort of terms as we're talking about different varieties of Protestant Christians, because this is where it can get a little confusing. So take one more further step back and let's talk about religion in England on one leg in this time period. It is a Protestant country. So this is a time period when countries have a national religion. And in Europe, you're basically Protestant or Catholic. We're talking the English Reformation has happened. So we have the Anglican Church, essentially, or the Church of England has been established. This is the national church in England. And there are people in England who feel that the Reformation of the Church of England has not gone far enough. And they have a couple of different ways of responding to that. So one way is to try to affect change from within. These are the people we call Puritans. These are the people who end up coming to Boston in 1630 and starting that settlement, that city. Then we have a smaller subset of people that their solution is basically to just leave the Church of England and go off and do their own thing with the other small subset of people who also think like them. And we call them separatists because they separated out from the Church of England. On the Mayflower, we have a whole bunch of separatists. They had separated themselves out and were living in Holland. Why did they have to live in exile in Holland? Because the law in England in this period said you had to be a member of the Church of England. You had to go to church service at the Church of England on Sundays. So they were breaking the law by worshiping separately. So the law wasn't you just have to pray on Sunday, it's you have to go to the right kind of church. And by the way, Catholics were also being persecuted in the same way.
What sort of punishment might you suffer if you didn't go to church?
So fines, you would have to pay a fine, essentially. Now, you could be excused if you were sick, if you were a woman, you just had a baby, if you were a child. But if you were found to be absent for any other reason, you had to pay a fine. And it could progress all the way up to being arrested. There is a fellow who comes on the Mayflower, William Brewster, and the father of another Mayflower passenger, Richard Jackson, who in the early 17th century are almost arrested. The record we have says that essentially the guy who was sent to arrest them couldn't find them in order to arrest them. What was the charge? Nonconformity, i.e. not praying the correct way. Mm-hmm. So it sort of varies. William Bradford, the second governor of Plymouth Colony, when he writes the history of their church and their colony, he talks about in England how their houses were set on and watched night and day. And essentially they were being, persecuted for their religious beliefs, which is what necessitates them leaving and going into Holland.
Okay. So you have Puritans, you have some Puritans, you have some separatists, you have some mercenary types coming for land and maybe fur trade or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And
so, get on the Mayflower.
They get on the Mayflower, and they have different, of course, when it comes to a religious holiday, they're going to have different ideas. And it caused some problems. And part of the problem was, or maybe adding to the problem was that another ship arrived that hadn't, had to deal with the hardships of the previous months, and they were frolicking. They were playing stool ball and pitching the bar. As I
Yeah.
understand it, on Christmas Day, times are tough. They said, "This is the day we're going to start building the houses," right? And they didn't even. What did they? First of all, what did they live in before they started building the houses? And so they went out to work, and they came back, and these people from the new group had been there a couple of weeks, playing games and stuff. So what did they live in before they started building the houses? And what is stool ball? And what is pitching the bar?
Excellent. All right. So before the Pilgrims built houses, they were living on Mayflower. So Mayflower was anchored about 1 to 1.5 miles out in Plymouth Harbor, and they were living on board and then taking the ship's boat essentially and rowing on shore every day to build houses, and some men sleeping on shore, essentially camping. So we do know that the first Christmas that the Pilgrims are in New England, Christmas Day is actually the day they start building houses. That's the day they start cutting trees and making preparations for building. And really, no matter what people's religious belief was, the necessity for shelter and survival is going to outweigh
Right.
anything else with Christmas. So the trouble doesn't really happen until a year later. So if we fast forward a year to Christmas 1621, half the Pilgrims had died during the first winter. So the survivors, about 50 of them, meet the native people over that year, agree to a mutual defense pact with Usamiquin or Massasoit, the sachem or leader of the Pokanoket Wampanoag. They learn how to grow corn. They are living right next door to many native people that whole year. They have a good harvest of the maize corn. They have this harvest home celebration, essentially, which you talked with Richard about, and really a diplomatic event, which happens at some point in the autumn, probably somewhere between late September and early November. And then on November 11th, another ship arrives. And it's incredibly exciting because remember, for all your 50 odd surviving Pilgrims, they have lived 6 months with the uncertainty of, did Mayflower actually make it back to England?
Oh, yeah, right.
If Mayflower hadn't made it back, they could have been, in deep trouble. The investors in their colony who were supposed to send supplies would not know that they were still alive, even, or where they were settled to send supplies. And so this ship brings that news, which must have been so welcome. And it's 35 passengers, mostly young men, according to the second governor of Plymouth Colony, William Bradford. And so I imagine at first there must have been this wonderful excitement of, more strong men. That's exactly what we need to build our colony and clear land and do the work we need to do. There's also 2 women and 2 children. But they very quickly realize these people are different from them. William Bradford describes many of them as being very wild. And Bradford ends up paying to send some of them back to England to get rid of them. And the other major event that happens when the ship arrives is this group of 35 people, which essentially is doubling the size of the town almost, does not have any food supplies. So they are arriving in November. They won't be able to plant and then harvest crops. The harvest doesn't come in until September. And they're completely dependent on Plymouth Colony to be fed.
What kind of half-baked organization was on this boat? I mean, did they know that part of the job was they were supposed to bring supplies? What did they do? Eat all the supplies on the way there?
Well, in fact, even the sailors needed to be resupplied with food to get back to England because it had taken them 4 months to get across the ocean, because half the time they were basically stuck within sight of England because the winds were completely contrary and they couldn't get out of the English Channel.
Jeez.
And then they finally get across. So, Governor Bradford's in a position where he has to give some of this precious corn to the sailors to get back to England. And they do. they're fine. And then he has to share it with these newly arrived people. So so they go from the joy of knowing that they're not going to starve, essentially, which is the first Thanksgiving, to within weeks, the governor is putting everyone on half rations. And he writes that he's not sure that the food is even going to last through the winter.
So they're not thrilled with these people. Plus, these new strong men didn't really have a great work ethic, right?
It's many of them not. And so this really comes to a head on Christmas of 1621. So these new folks have been here about 6 weeks. And the reason we know about this is because Governor Bradford, who's the second governor of Plymouth Colony, writes about it in his account of the history of the colony called Of Plymouth Plantation. And I brought a copy with me so I can actually read you his account if you want to hear it from his own mouth.
Of course.
Or I could paraphrase it. So I will read this to you. This is, I have the Ford edition, which has the original spelling and punctuation to try to make me pause at the places that Bradford writes.
Okay.
So he's just given an account of this whole year. And then he keeps going. He says, "And herewith I shall end this year. Only I shall remember one passage more, rather of mirth than of weight. On the day called Christmas Day, the governor called them out to work, as was used." And side note, remember, all the work is being done in common right now. So they're mostly clearing land at this point in the winter, cutting trees, to build houses. "But the most of this new company that had just arrived on the ship excused themselves and said it went against their consciences to work on that day. So the governor told them that if they made it matter of conscience, he would spare them till they were better informed. So he led away the rest and left them. But when they came home at noon from their work, he found them in the street at play, openly, some pitching the bar and some at stool ball and such like sports. So he went to them and took away their implements and told them that was against his conscience that they should play and others work. If they made the keeping of it matter of devotion, let them keep their houses. But there should be no gaming or reveling in the streets, since which time nothing hath been attempted that way, at least openly." So,
oh yeah, well, that's shame. They're not very stand-up people that's playing games while everybody else works. Again, what's stool ball?
Okay, so stool ball. So first of all, these are like the two sports that are actually, we know, happened in Plymouth Colony. So when we do our special 1621 eve of the first Thanksgiving programming in the English Village, we have these sports because we know they're documented. So stool ball is a team sport. It's like an ancestor of cricket. So essentially, you need two things to play. You need a ball, and I recommend playing with a leather ball stuffed with wool because it's easier on the hands, and you need a stool. And essentially, you take turns posting the ball back and forth. And the way you do it's kind of like the way you underhand serve in volleyball today. And essentially, it's, you go back and forth. And then depending on which team drops it, you have an opportunity to earn points. So essentially, if it's the team that did not serve that drops it, the serving team can earn a point. And
so it's kind of like volleyball without a net?
Yes, very much. And then if it drops and you can, like, wherever the ball is dropped, you kind of throw it and try to hit this stool. If you hit the stool, you get 2 points. If you don't hit it, you get 1 point.
All right. Sounds kind of fun, actually.
Team sport. Yeah, it's fun.
I
Come
like
and play
that
it with
game.
us next Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I do have a bunch of wool stuffed leather balls lying around, and now I'll be able to put them to good use. And pitching the bar.
So pitching the bar is very similar to Scottish caber toss, but it's not using a whole telephone pole like they do at Scottish Highland Games, but essentially it is a big piece of a tree, and you're sort of balancing it, and you run up to the line, and you have to flip it at least once, end over end, the long way. And the winner is whoever gets it to go the furthest and the straightest. So men showing off how strong and agile they are.
certainly was a simpler time. I remember, this is not related at all, but I bet it's an old game. We used to, when I was a kid, in an all Protestant town, by the way. I think it's remarkable that in my town in New Hampshire, there were only 3 little Protestant churches, like just wooden boxes. No Catholic churches, no churches of any other kind. This was somehow, I grew up not knowing there was anything else. Anyway, we would play steel wedges, and I feel like that's an ancient game. It was just a pile of firewood. You might have 6 on each side and a baling twine in the middle, and you'd have to run over and get a wedge and get back without getting tagged. But that's beside the point. Now, tell me how you celebrate, how you deal with, and how you celebrate Christmas at the museum. Of course, it wasn't very festive in New England, but you do festivate there. So what do you do?
We do. So, we close to the public. Our living history sites close the Sunday after Thanksgiving. So our calendar year in the 17th century English Village exhibit never actually gets to Christmas. So it's sort of like Narnia in that way, I guess. It's never Christmas. But we do, as a museum, have lots of fun things. So, for example, we hosted this year a wonderful craft fair the weekend after Thanksgiving, which I would encourage you to come and check out next year. We had over 60 vendors. And
what kind of things are at the craft? What kind of things are at the craft fair? Leatherwork?
We had fiber artists, painters, wood artists, ceramic artists, indigenous artists. There was a wide array. I picked up some beautiful greeting cards made by a woman with pressed flowers from her garden. It's just these wonderful local artisans. But we also have other things. So, for example, you can, bring your kids, your grandkids. We have breakfast with Santa, which is a really fun, jovial brunch menu. And we've got Santa. We have film screenings. We have at our shops tomorrow night, we have a sip-in shop. So there'll be, drinks and snacks, and you can do your Christmas shopping at our shops. We have centerpiece making workshops, so all different sorts of things. If you want to learn more about Christmas, I'll be talking about it more at our Lunch and Learn tomorrow at noon, which is in person or on Zoom. You just have to sign up in advance at our website.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. I don't want to use the word promote, but promote that. Tell me more about it. How do people sign up and get involved with the Lunch and Learn?
Just go to our website, plimoth.org, Plimoth, and you can find in our calendar the event and sign up. It's free. This month has been grant funded, so it's always free for members. Normally there's a small ticket charge, but it's free. And I'll be talking a lot more about Christmas in Plymouth Colony and sort of how some of our approaches to talking about Christmas here at the museum, and a little bit more about Christmas in Old England as well. So that will be really fun. And that's a monthly members program that we have.
So for anybody that sees this and has children, for you as a 6-year-old, when you first went, it was super impactful. And parents like doing positively impactful things. And so this is something that parents might want to consider. And the museum is a tremendous resource that a lot of people don't think of. It's right in your backyard, and as you're trying to think of something different for Christmas to do with the family or by yourself, especially if you have kids, it seems like a great option. Am I right?
Yeah, well, and I would say, especially for local folks, a membership to Plymouth Patuxet Museums is a really wonderful and valuable Christmas present.
Oh, yeah.
Because it gives you not just unlimited access with your friends and family, but also access to our many programs throughout the year that we do. And also a wonderful members magazine that we send out once a year. So I would encourage memberships. And I say Plymouth Patuxet Museums is a museum for all ages. It's because of the way that we teach history, right? We specialize in recreating immersive historical environments so you can feel like you're stepping back in time. And that's a really fun way to learn and have fun with your friends and family. And that's fun whether you're 6 or 60 or 96.
It is. One, they asked you to wipe, when you were 6, they asked you to wipe dishes. Does that happen still today, that sometimes people are engaged and get involved and do stuff?
Yes, very much. And in fact, one of the things that I tell all of my new staff, because I onboard, I train all of our site staff, is my approach to the creating the guest experience on our sites today is 100% based on my experience as a 6-year-old. And that's always in the back of my mind is that experience as a 6-year-old, and I want to create that for our guests today. So we really focus on getting our guests hands-on with history, whether that is sitting on a fur-covered bed in the Nushwetu on our historic Patuxet home site. You can see one of our Wituash behind me, or in the 17th century English village. Maybe getting asked to help with a daily chore that a pilgrim is doing, which could be, cooking or sawing wood or, hauling water, you name it.
Sawing wood was one of those 2-person saws?
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. No, we work with our staff to train them to be able to safely put tools like a 2-person saw in the hands of a guest. And that, like, even an 8-year-old can help with that.
One thing you'll learn if you do many of those activities is how physically weak modern people are, and how physically strong and tough these people had to be. Like crazy tough. We are such wimps today compared to these folks. I'm sure.
Well,
I don't want to be negative. I don't want to have you go down there and feel weak, but what you will do is have an appreciation for how crazy strong and tough these people were.
I do joke that working on the site, especially in the 17th century English village, is like we jokingly call it pilgrim boot camp, because it is a lot more physical than a lot of jobs it's not a desk job. We actually do carry water with a yoke and pail, and we do split wood with wedges. And, if I'm cooking over the fire and I'm lifting a cast iron pot, some of them are rather heavy. Carrying wood.
Yep. I mean, just think of all the time in the day you needed to just get water, and just, how much time you had to spend just not dying was like all day long. And you didn't get much time for anything else. I don't want to run out. I think we've come to a good place, and I don't want to spoil it by running off at the mouth. So I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Richard Pickering for introducing Malka Benjamin to me. And thank you for all you do and spending time with me. And thanks to your staff and everybody that makes the Plymouth Patuxet Museum, did I say it right?
Yes.
Super duper special place. And you're associated with the Smithsonian now, right?
Yes, we are. We're an affiliate institution.
Yeah. So you see, folks, it's the real deal. So thank you so much, and happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays, or as they say in England, happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. And folks, you could help us all by sharing this with either an individual, this broadcast with an individual that you think would find it fun, or if you're involved with your town, if you post this on your town website. This is something that everyone would like. It's good positive content for your town website and whatever. So you could all help us both out. So thank you very much, and thank you. We'll be done
Lovely
in about...
chatting.
Let me end this. We'll be unlive